a lot more to New Zealand than it. And so I was really just kind of looking for a good opportunity to move out and explore more. And so I ended up accepting a job at the Wedderburn Tavern in Central Otago.
The Wedderburn Tavern.
Yes.
Famous, but Jen, there's nothing there.
Well, except for the tavern. That's it. But it's the beating heart of this community.
Yeah,
and
that is tiny. That is tiny. From San Fran to Auckland to a tavern in the middle of beautiful country, but it is nowhere. Peter Field, can you relate to this, going from New York City to Auckland? Sorry, Christchurch.
It's such a funny thing. It all depends. Ōtautahi, some people left Ōtautahi because they're going to a small town, where if you come from New York, you feel like you're moving to a small town.
Yeah.
So it is all relative, that's for sure.
It is.
Well, Ella?
I come from a place called Ahipara in the far, far north, and my parents moved to the city when I was 6 years old because they realised all my brothers and sisters had moved to the city, and if they ever wanted to get to know their grandchildren, then they were going to have to come to town. So they put me in the back of the truck and drove to the city. And for the very same reason, I'm going to stay here because my children, my adults now, are global citizens. And if I want to hang out with my grandchildren, I'm going to have to live in Auckland. But I always go home to Ahipara for holidays.
Oh, kia ora, Ella. And what a beautiful part of the country that is. Gosh. Jen, Wedderburn, right?
Yep, Wedderburn.
It doesn't have a sky tower or fine dining. Do you miss all that?
Well, frankly, the food at the tavern is pretty darn good. But I feel like whenever you move around, and I've moved around quite a bit, I've always followed my career. And so anywhere you leave, you miss certain things, right? And it's a trade-off. But for me, living here has been such an amazing experience. It's been almost 6 months. But for some of the things that I do miss and some of the conveniences of living in a city, there's just so much more that I've gained with the amazing people here. I mean, the community is just incredible. Yeah. And I've never lived in even a small town, let alone, rural life. And it's super cool. And no, I don't have the ocean anymore, but I have these amazing mountains. And it just, there's farm animals everywhere. And it's a really fun experience, and I'm really glad to be doing it.
Yeah, Linda says, I moved from Auckland to North Hokianga 20 years ago. I've never regretted it, likely to regret it even less if Auckland ends up with a mayor that I don't like, says someone. But that notion of finding your place in life, finding where it sounds like it's been a real journey for you, Jen, going from San Fran to Auckland, and now you just seem and feel, and you can hear it. You seem so happy in the tiny village of Wedderburn.
Right. Yeah, I am. It's an absolute blast, and I work at the pub a few days a week, and I carry on my other work, which I can do from anywhere. So I've still got my career, and then I work at the pub a few days a week, which frankly is a blast. So
beautiful, Jen. Hey, thanks for being with us. Kia ora. Thank you for your time.
Kia ora. Thanks for having me.
Just on that notion of belonging, I guess, Peter, and missing home. When you came back from New York City, and some people have been lucky enough to visit that area, do you miss New York?
Well, it's a strange thing. Certainly the smells. Some things just automatically make you nostalgic, which means sort of painful memories. You just remember things in a certain way that just get inside you, and you can't really judge them. It's just the way it is. But we love New Zealand, and we consider Aotearoa our home completely, and would never look back.
Welcome, kia ora. No, good to have you, Peter and Ella. Henry, thank you very much for your time. You've both been absolutely wonderful. The best fish and chips ever eaten are to be found in Lynn's Kitchen in the Wedderburn pub. Going out on a bit of cure, taking you to Nick Truebridge on Checkpoint. I'm Wallace Chapman, back with you 3:45 tomorrow.
good evening. Welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Nick Truebridge. A deepening crisis in Russia sees people fleeing their homeland as President Putin announces reservists could be forced to fight his war. Meanwhile, we talk to Russian nationals in New Zealand about their homeland's increasingly desperate offensive in Ukraine. Want to know what it's like picking fruit, maybe driving a forklift? A government ministry is turning to technology in a bid to get job seekers into work. All Blacks coach Ian Foster has the faithful in a frenzy online. Why has last week's fan favourite been benched, while one of Canterbury's favourite sons remains out of position? And have you seen Burrito the Poodle? We have the latest on a family's week-long quest.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon. I'm Karen McCarthy. The government is inching closer to expelling the Russian ambassador to New Zealand as Vladimir Putin escalates the conflict with Ukraine. There has been global alarm at the Russian president's comments about nuclear war and plan to hold referendums on joining Russia in occupied regions of Ukraine. Foreign Affairs Minister Nanaia Mahuta was asked today if a decision to expel the Russian ambassador, Georgy Zuev, could come quickly.
Possibly, quite possibly. Again, that's the whole signal that I have sent today, is that we're in a more dynamic space. It appears that Putin is increasing his aggression against Ukraine and taking actions that contravene international law.
Nanaia Mahuta says the Prime Minister will speak to her counterparts about the escalating tensions at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. New Zealand-based Russians have described Vladimir Putin's latest televised address as horrendous and crushing. Elena Nikiforova told RNZ Mr. Putin's speech has caused hysteria for her friends and family, and she feels sick to her stomach. She says she knows people preparing to go into hiding, fearing conscription. Meanwhile, Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky has praised captured soldiers of the Azov battalion, now released in a major prisoner swap with Russia. The battalion surrendered after the long siege of Mariupol. Ukraine has handed over 55 Russian soldiers, as well as the pro-Russian politician Viktor Medvedchuk, who faced treason charges in Ukraine. Earlier, Mr. Zelensky addressed the United Nations General Assembly in New York by video link, calling for Russia to be punished for invading Ukraine. A mid-Canterbury farming leader says the culling of thousands of cattle infected with Mycoplasma bovis will be a bitter pill for some farmers. The Ministry for Primary Industries says infected stock from the 5-Star beef feedlot in Ashburton, which farms about 12,000 cattle, and stock from another 8 high-risk farms will also be culled in an attempt to eradicate the disease. Mid-Canterbury Federated Farmers Nick Truebridge says for some it'll be the second time their cattle have been culled.
We're at the end of the eradication program and yeah, it's just very unfortunate for those farmers. It's pretty tough on those farmers that have to go through a depopulation in that Wakanui area, and for some it won't be the first time. So yeah, so that's really tough on those affected farmers.
Nick Truebridge says the measure is necessary to protect New Zealand's trade reputation. Health authorities are reporting 4 more cases of monkeypox in New Zealand, taking the total number to 9. The 4 cases were all reported in the past week in people who recently returned from overseas. 3 are isolating in Auckland and 1 is in the South Island. The Ministry of Health says there's no evidence of community transmission. It says a World Health Organization report from yesterday shows monkeypox cases peaked globally in mid-August. A father forced out of the Gloriavale Christian community has told a court how his epileptic daughter received 3rd-degree burns while having a fit at work in the kitchen. John Reddy described the experience to the Employment Court in Christchurch today. Mr. Reddy says while working with boiling water in the kitchen, his daughter had an epileptic fit and received serious burns, one going unnoticed for 6 hours.
Her hand was attended to, but she had a 3rd-degree burn on her shoulder and no one was aware of it, not even my daughter was aware of it until that evening.
John Reddy says he had grave concerns for his children's safety, especially his 7 daughters during his time in the community. It's 5:04. In sport, the All Blacks will be without skipper Sam Cane for their Rugby Championship decider against the Wallabies in Auckland this week. Cane and midfielder David Havili suffered concussions in the win over the Wallabies in Melbourne last week. Sam Whitelock will lead the side, while Adi Savia returns at number 8 in one of 5 changes. Meanwhile, All Blacks coach Ian Foster is satisfied with the 6-week ban Wallabies lock Darcy Swain has been given for the dangerous clear-out on All Blacks midfielder Quinn Tupaia.
Our people will always review decisions to make sure we learn from the processes, but it seems to me that they've come up with a pretty satisfactory answer.
Silver Ferns coach Dame Nolene Taurua concedes the shambolic series against Jamaica is not a good look for netball. The Ferns crushed the understrength visitors 70-45 in Auckland last night in the first of 2 tests. The series was postponed and shortened due to visa issues with the Jamaican side, leaving them needing to use their coach as a reserve. Heading into tonight's second test in Auckland, Taurua feels the series isn't up to international standards.
There are areas that are disappointing, not only for us as the Silver Ferns, but also our fans, and also our ability to present something that's of world class.
And the All Whites play Australia for the first time in 11 years tonight in Brisbane. The match kicks off at 10 o'clock. That's the news.
Tonight on Night's Nutrition, in the age of near double-digit inflation, Amanda Bryan offers some affordable options for healthy eating. Preparing your feet for spring with podiatrist Emma Worthington. Not just a case of putting on the right running shoes or tramping boots. While our overseas correspondent Motoko Kakubayashi is on the line from Tokyo, which hopefully dodged a bullet in the form of Super Typhoon Nanmadol. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
A network funded through New Zealand On Air. We're on radio, rnz.co.nz, and on your mobile. Nick Truebridge is here with Checkpoint after the short forecast from Met Service to midnight on Friday. For Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, showers widespread during afternoons and evenings with possible thunderstorms. Waikato, Waitomo, Bay of Plenty, the Central High Country, also Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Rain spreading south today, heavy falls in the east. Rain eases to showers later tomorrow, though thunderstorms are possible in Taihape. Taranaki and Whanganui to Wellington and Wairarapa. Isolated showers, rain developing overnight, possibly heavy about the Tararua district, and thunderstorms possible from South Taranaki to Manawatu later tomorrow. Bulla, fine today, but the odd shower possible this afternoon. Cloudy tomorrow with a few showers possible inland. For Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, north of Christchurch, mainly fine today. Cloudy tomorrow with rain spreading south, scattered falls for Nelson. The remainder of Canterbury, also Otago, Southland and Fiordland, fine apart from cloudy areas morning and night. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy. RNZ National, it's 5:07.
Thanks, Karen. Kia ora, this is Checkpoint. I'm Nick Truebridge. There have been scenes of panic in Russia as people head for the exit by plane, train or car to get out of the country. Last night, President Putin announced the Kremlin will call up thousands of extra troops to fight in Ukraine. But some fear the president won't stop at military reservists and have taken evasive action by fleeing the country. Flights out of Russia sold out within hours. The price of a ticket has increased dramatically. Hundreds of protesters have been arrested for rallying against the Kremlin's decision. World leaders are gathering in New York at the UN. Ukraine's president has called for just punishment for Russia. We'll have more on that in a moment, but first here's World Watch's Perlina Lau.
As Russia loses ground in parts of eastern Ukraine, Russia's President Vladimir Putin has chosen to escalate. In a rare televised address, he ordered a partial mobilization of military reservists to boost the armed forces.
To defend our motherland, its sovereignty and territorial integrity, for the security of our people and on the liberated territories, it is necessary to support the proposal of the Defence Ministry and Chief of General Staff to announce a partial mobilization of military reservists.
Up to 300,000 troops will be called up 7 months into the war to support what Russia still calls its special military operation. The move comes one day after occupied areas of Ukraine announced snap referendums on joining Russia. Mr. Putin's message to the West, this is not a bluff.
Our country, too, has different weapons of destruction. In some cases, they are more modern than those of NATO. If the territorial integrity of our country is threatened, then to defend Russia and our people, we shall, of course, use all means at our disposal. I am not bluffing.
Across Russia, there is panic. One-way airline tickets out of the country spiked after the president's order, with flights to popular destinations like Turkey and Armenia snapped up. There are fears men of fighting age will not be allowed to leave the country.
I'm worried this is just the start and that there could be full mobilization. If our leaders demand this, we must do our duty. I trust Putin 100%.
Even in prison camps, inmates are being recruited to fight, being promised freedom if they serve 6 months and survive. This woman, Valena, went to visit her husband in prison a few days ago, but was told her husband, a convicted murderer, wasn't there.
I said, "What do you mean, not here? He's been here for 13 years and suddenly he's gone?" They told me they had no more information. A few days later, he called me from a Ukrainian number. I know for sure that my husband is in Ukraine. Even if he agreed to go there, he was sent illegally. Sending convicts into combat is against the law.
More than 1,000 people have been arrested as they protested the mobilization order, mostly in St. Petersburg and Moscow. Political scientist and president of Eurasia Group Ian Bremer has tweeted, web searches in Russia for how to break an arm have surged, adding Russians are considering anything to get out of combat. The escalation follows heavy losses in Ukraine, where Ukrainian forces have recaptured swathes of land east of Kharkiv. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is calling for just punishment. Speaking to world leaders at the UN General Assembly, he says Ukraine and the world wants peace, but Russia does not.
Meanwhile, back here, the Foreign Minister, Nanaia Mahuta, says the expulsion of the Russian ambassador remains under active consideration and New Zealand will respond accordingly if Russia continues to escalate tensions. Well, joining us now is University of Otago International Relations Professor Robert Patman. Evening, Mr. Patman. More on the ambassador in a second, but first of all, what do you make of Putin's moves here?
I think Mr. Putin's in a very difficult spot with few good options left. He's been on the receiving end of a very successful Ukrainian counteroffensive, and he quite frankly, what it's all about, this announcement, is actually taking steps to replace his depleted forces in the areas occupied by the Russians. They've lost a lot of troops taken prisoner in the recent counteroffensive. A lot have been killed. It's estimated that Russia has lost up to about 50,000 troops since it invaded Ukraine in February. This announcement is, in a sense, has been put off by the regime for quite a long time because it is an admission that the special operation, as Mr. Putin's called it, is not going according to plan. And that's been a difficult thing for him to admit.
Sorry, Robert. Sorry for interrupting. And there are sort of two things here, right? There's obviously the calling up of additional troops, but also the sort of veiled threat of nuclear action. Do you think that is legitimate, or is Putin, bluffing here? Call it what you will.
It's not the first time that Mr. Putin has resorted to nuclear saber rattling. When he launched the invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February, he also then raised the possibility of nuclear weapons being used against states supporting Ukraine. Well, it hasn't eventuated, and it certainly didn't deter the United States, New Zealand and other countries from supporting Ukraine. It does seem to be an escalation on these previous threats, but it's kind of striking that Mr. Putin used the phrase, and I'm not bluffing this time, which is a sort of, again, acknowledgement that he perhaps was bluffing before. I think, Nick, this escalation of nuclear rhetoric is designed to rattle opinion in the Western world and get Western leaders more uncertain about his intentions. And it's really a way of trying to detach the West from Ukraine and try to consolidate the gains that Russia has made. So I think it's a tactical use of rhetoric. Mr. Putin strikes me as delusional, but not suicidal. And I'll be very surprised if, after all, Russia would be one of the biggest casualties if it launched a nuclear war.
How do you think it ends, Robert? I mean, you've mentioned the mass casualties, certainly on Russia's part. With your knowledge of, conflicts like this, others like it, where do you see it going and ending?
Well, my crystal ball is no better than anyone else's, Nick, but the trends do suggest that this mobilisation won't fill the gap in time. And it won't be, most of these people being called up won't be available to, even if they comply with the order, they won't be available to next year. So I think what we're witnessing now is the momentum, the military momentums with Ukraine. We could see a Russian defeat before the end of the year militarily on the ground. And I think if this continues to go Ukraine's way, I think many people within Russia may decide that Mr. Putin's 22 years in power is perhaps long enough. So he's not invulnerable, and there's already been signs of disquiet amongst the Russian military and also the FSB, the intelligence community in Russia. These have been two key constituencies for Mr. Putin. If they are unhappy with him and don't like the way things are developing in the Ukraine, he could possibly be regarded as surplus to requirements in the not too distant future.
And as we've just heard, the expulsion of the Russian ambassador here remains on the table. Should we take that course of action? If so, what would the effect be?
I think we should consider it seriously. It's very important. Mr. Putin won't be moved by that message, but it's the crucial thing is to convey to the Russian people that the behaviour of their leader in tearing up the UN Charter and illegally invading a democratic neighbour is completely beyond the pale and must not be tolerated. And they must realise, Russian people must realise that this behaviour mustn't be repeated in the future. So I think a very strong message from small countries and middle powers is very important, as well as the sort of messaging Russians are getting from NATO. But I think it's much more important for a broader message to get across so that Russians are left in no doubt that part of the problem may be the leadership of their government.
Indeed. Thanks, Robert. Robert Patman joining us there this evening from University of Otago. It is 16 minutes past 5. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Technology is giving job hunters an interactive insight into jobs they might be keen to give a go. The Ministry of Social Development is giving those on the job seeker benefit a taste of work through virtual reality. Leah Tibbett explains.
In a room full of people, Jackson Anderson Smith stands alone, trialling the role of a security guard. Near him stand some others, one pruning kiwi fruit, another driving a forklift. The one thing they all have in common? They're all wearing a virtual reality headset, providing training for potential employment.
Yeah, I actually had a bit of fun with it, and I'd never done VR before, so it was quite exciting. And you got to see some of the things they would encounter in their job, and the stuff they wear, the stuff they use.
Mr. Anderson Smith has a part-time job, but is looking for extra work and headed to the job expo to see what's out there. While he's realised a security guard isn't the right fit for him, he's happy to know now, rather than wasting an employer's time.
The VR definitely gets you right into it, and you can actually see what the job itself is a little bit like, even though it is just a simulation. Yeah, it does give you a good idea of what to expect.
The expo at the Hamilton Gardens today was organised by Skills VR alongside the Ministry of Social Development. MSD's Nicola Anderson says trying to find a job can be tough and daunting, but says the virtual reality headsets are a way to break the ice.
They get to experience things at their own pace, think about the things they're seeing. If they make mistakes, then nobody's around to see them do that. So it's a really cool way to get people sort of thinking about what they might want to do or what they don't want to do as well, because that's a big part of a job hunt as well, is, oh, actually that's definitely not for me, and then that way they can put themselves, on the right path.
There are about 14,500 people in Waikato receiving the job seekers benefit. Miss Anderson says the expo is designed to get both employers and potential employees engaged. and the VR headsets are the link for people to make those connections.
The reality is that there's lots of jobs around, and so it's a great opportunity for people to come along and investigate what the jobs look like and where they're going to be best suited to get into work.
The Skills VR modules include training for the Site Safe Foundation Passport for civil and construction industries. Skills VR marketing manager Devon Toy says the tech can reduce 4 days training into 30-minute sessions and is effective for people who may have difficulties with literacy.
It takes away all the distractions. You are focused on the task at hand, and essentially we try our best to captivate the learning while doing sort of mechanism inside of you, and we do make our modules about 15 to 20 minutes long, so it's not an overload.
MSD's employment coordinator Alice Tanner says the Employment Expo was first trialled in May. She says it resulted in one employer hiring more than 15 people from the event.
A lot of the employers that we're working with, they're really, really desperate for staff, and it's just, some people it might be that they've not thought of working in that industry before. It's a bit of a change for them, so just trying to keep up with that sort of thing. And this is a really good chance for people to kind of expand their horizons, I guess.
The expo attracted more than 300 job seekers today, and there is more scheduled for every region in the country.
Yeah, one employer, 15 people from one of those events last time it was held, so a pretty good strike rate, you'd have to say. And of course, it is an employee's market out there at the moment, isn't it? Are you looking for a new job? How are you finding looking for a new job? I guess the other question is, if you could whip on one of those headsets, what job might you like to turn your hand at? Are you picking fruit or are you driving a forklift? Let us know. You can text us as always, 2101. It is 5:20. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Stay with us. We're on the hunt for Burrito the Missing Pooch. Shortly, you won't want to miss that. Kia ora e te iwi, and while we're at it, we're keen for your feedback on any of our stories tonight. We've of course covered off Russia as well as the job market. Don't forget you can text us, as I said, on 2101. You can also tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But first, here's Karen with the headlines.
Thanks, Nick. New Zealand says expelling Russia's ambassador remains on the table as the Kremlin talks nuclear escalation over Ukraine. There has been global alarm at the Russian president's comments. Foreign Minister Nanaia Mahuta says a decision on expulsion could come quickly. And Ukraine has handed over 55 Russian soldiers, as well as the pro-Russian politician Viktor Medvedchuk, who faced treason charges in Ukraine. In return, it secured the release of 200 soldiers, including members of the Azov battalion, who defended the Mariupol steelworks. A mid-Canterbury farming leader says the news thousands of cattle infected with Mycoplasma bovis are to be culled will be a bitter pill for some farmers to swallow. The Ministry for Primary Industries says infected stock from the 5-Star Beef feedlot in Ashburton, which farms about 12,000 cattle, and stock from another 8 high-risk farms will also be culled. Federated Farmers Nick Truebridge says it will be the second cull for some farmers. Health authorities are reporting 4 more cases of monkeypox in the past week in New Zealand, taking the total number to 9. The Danish royal palace says Queen Margareta, who is 82, has tested positive for COVID the day after she attended the funeral of Queen Elizabeth in London. She sat beside other European royals. And Australian singer John Farnham is recovering after a 12-hour surgery for mouth issues. In a statement, his family said Farnham was recovering well. On the traffic front in the South Island, a serious crash has been reported on State Highway 73, Lake Pierce and Arthur's Pass. That was around 45 minutes ago. Motorists are warned to expect delays. No other issues to report at this point. More news headlines and any traffic updates for you around 5:40.
Thanks, Karen. There's been no shortage of debate, surprise, surprise, in the lead up to this weekend's big rugby match between the Wallabies and the All Blacks in Auckland, and some big selection calls. Coach Ian Foster has benched breakout hooker Samisoni Taukei'aho in favour of Cody Taylor. We'll get to that in a second. But also, Beauden Barrett will slot in at fullback, despite calls by some to move Will Jordan, the Cantab, back to his favoured position. For more on this, I'm joined in studio by sports reporter Clay Wilson. Right, this is the big stuff now. The Barretts. Let's start with the Barretts because, of course, Beauden's going to slot into fullback. There were questions, of course, about whether Will Jordan would go back there. What has the coach said about this? What are fans saying about this?
Well, there's a bit of flow-on effect here because you start in the midfield,
of course,
where we've obviously had issues. We've got no Anton Leonard-Brown, no Jack Goodhue, both out with long-term injuries. Then at the weekend, David Avili gets concussed. Quinn Tupai had that horrific knee injury. There's a hole to fill there, and what they've done is they've brought Geordie Barrett forward from fullback into second five.
Who's played plenty of second five, right?
Played a lot, he said. Played 10 up until about the age of 15, and then all through his high school years and during his early club years and Canterbury years played at second five, so has a lot of experience there. So he's come up to second five, which of course vacates the fullback slot, and they've opted to keep Beauden Barrett there, who played a lot of the match last week, because these issues in the midfield happened quite early in that test in Melbourne, didn't they? So Geordie Barrett came forward, Beauden slotted in, and that's essentially what they've decided to do, is to keep that
continuity,
combinations, rather than bringing someone like Will Jordan in. I think Ian Foster said they definitely considered it, and you know, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to work out that Will Jordan's a very good fullback, and it's been a hotly debated topic in the All Blacks about him getting a shot in that position. But this is what they've decided to do, and I think either way you look at it, they're very good players, and they're going to do some sort of decent job.
I know a few fans in Christchurch, though, and they're not overly pleased, but they're just going to have to get over it, I suppose.
I can imagine, yes.
Yeah. It's coach's call. Okay, I guess this is the big one as well. Samisoni Taukei'aho, of course, from Hamilton, plays for the Chiefs, has been really probably the revelation of the forward pack this international season. He's benched Cody Taylor, who people may remember if they watch rugby, had some real wobbles in Christchurch, I think it was, on his home track.
Towards the end of the game there,
So what is the rationale for this one?
Yeah, as you say, Samisoni Taukei'aho has been one of the breakout, probably arguably the breakout player for the All Blacks this season, and especially these last 2 or 3 tests when he's got a start, he's really come on, and they clearly really like what he's doing, and he was great in that game in Melbourne last week, wasn't he? So you would think maybe he's a young player, he's got a bit of momentum, you keep him in that spot, but what they've done is they've opted to bring Cody Taylor in. Like you said, he had those struggles in Christchurch, and they're essentially going to give him a crack here before the Rugby Championship finishes. So whether it's the right or wrong thing, I mean, you have to say that Samisoni Taukei'aho has a lot of qualities off the bench with the power he has and perhaps tired legs, end of the competition. This is the rationale from Ian Foster. It's a 1-2 punch. It's a different way of doing it, having Cody Taylor start and having Samisoni Taukei'aho come off the bench.
You mentioned tired legs, right, and I think I was reading one of the live blogs today and workload was mentioned by Foster, or alluded to at least. But I mean, he's young and he's a pro, isn't he? I don't get a day off checkpoint because of workload. Maybe I should.
Well, I think if both you and I were selecting the team, we would have kept Taukei'aho in there. But unfortunately, we don't get that privilege. That's down to Ian Foster and his fellow selectors, and this is what they've decided. But yeah, I think a lot of people would have liked to see him get another crack, given how well he's been going.
Hey, thanks, Clay. And very quickly, the loose forward trio, a few changes. We've got about 30 seconds.
Yeah, so obviously Sam Cane's out. Ardie Savea comes back, so Scott Barrett also out, so you get Akira Ioane, Dalton Papali'i and Ardie Savea coming back. And just quickly before I leave, the All Whites tonight in Brisbane, ahead of that game here in Auckland on Sunday, which will be the first for 5 years for the All Whites at home, and tonight's game actually the first in 11 years for the All Whites against the Socceroos. So something to watch for football fans.
Plus the netball tonight as well, of course.
Exactly, second test.
Funny series.
It's all been happening.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Clay. Yeah, big weekend of sport ahead with the All Blacks and the All Whites, and of course don't forget the Silver Ferns tonight. Right, an Auckland couple is spending their 4th night camping in Auckland's Botanic Gardens as they continue to search for their missing dog. 3-year-old toy poodle Burrito, that's right, Burrito, hasn't been seen since his owners brought him for a walk around this time last week. Our reporter Leonard Powell joins us now live from the Botanic Gardens, where Burrito's owners Grace and Isaac Loyola have set up camp. Leonard, it's been a week, hasn't it? So have there been any sightings since last Thursday?
Kia ora, Nick. I'm here with Grace Loyola, and there has been a few sightings since last Thursday. Last Friday there was 3 to 4 sightings on surrounding streets of Burrito, and the latest sighting was where we are here, and that was on Monday, Burrito in the bush here, just in the off-leash park of the Botanic Gardens here in Manurewa. But no sighting since then. There was some word earlier today of a potential dog in a field at the nearby Totara Park, but there's been no confirmations of that. So we're still sort of, the lookout is still well and truly on.
Still going, yeah. And what have Grace and Isaac been trying to do to get Burrito back?
Well, the measures have been immense. I'm here with Grace, and Grace, you've actually set, there's a tent behind us here. Could you tell us a little bit about the situation?
So we're just like having a shelter here because one night we were just like having our hoodies and it started raining, and this lady, she was so lovely. She said like, I think you guys just need a shelter, a small tent, so maybe you can just stay here and wait for your dog Burrito. And she was just so lovely and have gifted us with a tent. Like, we're not residing here to camp out, actually. Like, I mean, yeah, but it's just like a shelter for us, just to protect us from this weather, like it's raining, while we're waiting for our dog.
And you've got traps out, you've been putting toys of Burritos out, your own clothes. Could you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing to try and lure Burrito back?
Yeah, so from different sightings of Burrito, we have placed like 4 traps. So 1 trap here, and then 3 more traps on every exit of the forest just to lure him. So we placed chicken, his toys, a piece of our clothes, and like a signage that's for our lost dog Burrito. So just people are aware what are those traps for. So at least Burrito can smell the food in our sense, and at least he can be caught, and like we know that he's safe and he'll be back to us. Yeah.
And how's the community support been to find Burrito, Grace?
We are just like very overwhelmed with the support of the community, like especially the social media and like the Facebook groups in different areas around the Botanic Garden. So every time we talk to people, we give flyers. They said like, oh, we're praying for you. We're hoping that we're gonna hear good news that your dog will be reunited with you again. So it's just very, very overwhelming, and we're just very thankful for the community.
And just quickly, if you could let the listeners know how important Burrito is to you. You mentioned yesterday you don't have any children. Burrito's like a child to you.
Yeah, so Burrito is a family member to us. He's like, like I've mentioned, he's like a child, but yeah, because we just treat him not just a pet, but yeah, he's a family member, and he's just very dear to us. And I'm pretty sure like most dog owners will feel the same. It's just, a very horrible experience for someone to lose your dog. Yeah.
And just really quick, Grace, we've had a lot of feedback today. People love the name Burrito. Is there a special story about Burrito's name?
Actually, like lots of people were asking me like, why Burrito? I said like, my husband even said like, we don't really like, it's not really our favorite, but I do like eating Burrito, but I find it very cute. I said like, whatever dog I'm gonna have, I'm just gonna name it Burrito, because like it's just very cute and unique. Yeah.
We'll send it back to you, Nick. If people need to know anything else, Burrito the Poodle on Instagram or Facebook, there's nearly 3,000 people following the page. And if people are looking for something to do this weekend, if Burrito, hopefully it's been found by then, but if Burrito hasn't been found, could come walking around the park and show some support.
Lenny, could we just get a very brief description of what Burrito looks like? Brown with is it wearing that scarf?
Absolutely. Maybe, yeah, Burrito. So Grace, what's Burrito wearing, and just a little quick description of what Burrito looks like?
So Burrito is wearing his tag and his harness, a collar, so with the blue and orange or light blue stripe. So it's very distinct colors. So we were telling people, if you see him, he will be like wearing a tag, his collar and his harness. Yeah.
And an orange toy poodle.
He's a red toy poodle. Yeah. We say to people he's brown, but he's actually a red toy poodle, but it's just easier to describe a brown toy poodle. Yeah, he's very fluffy. Yeah.
All right. Hey, thanks, Grace, and thanks, Lenny, as well, who, of course, is there with Grace, one of Burrito's owners, as the search continues for the 3-year-old toy poodle. It is 33 minutes past 5. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Time for the business news now with Nona Peltier. Nona, dairy giant Fonterra, tell us about them.
Oh, Fonterra, they reported their full year result today, and it was a good result. It was the net profit, bottom line, down about 3% to $583 million. Still a good result, though, because normalized profit was up slightly at about 0.5%. Well, the good news is that Fonterra's result indicates that the company is on track to meet its forecast for this current financial year. A record payout to farmers this year and last. What are we seeing here? He reckons that this is the chief executive, Miles Hurrell. He estimates that the farm gate milk price alone would add $13.7 billion to the New Zealand economy, which is great. Now, you might be wondering, what about these dairy prices? Well, they're record very high prices. And I spoke with Chief Executive Miles Hurrell early today. He says the global dairy prices appear to be stabilizing at their recent high levels, which means that perhaps dairy prices may stop escalating. This is what he had to say.
Retailers will make their own calls on how they position their pricing, but we are seeing, the year prior, the milk price $9.30 for the year just concluded. Now, year ahead forecast is $9.25. So we're seeing a bit of stability at the milk price level now. So how that gets translated into the retail level, ultimately, as I say, the retailers will make those calls. But I think a bit of stability there is probably what we're starting to see, which should hopefully help at the retail end for consumers.
And so that's Miles Hurrell. Now, I guess that means that for consumers that are worried about the price of cheese, the price might stabilize for them, as well as the price of butter and so forth. But really, there's a lot of geopolitical turmoil out there. There's issues with milk supply globally. It's hard to say. It's hard to forecast. Yeah. So the company is staying the course.
In consumer sentiment, we've spoken a lot about this, particularly over the last couple of years with the pandemic, of course. It's on the rise, but it's still a little grim.
Grim? Can you be a little bit grim? I'm not sure. I think it's pretty bad. Look, the Westpac McDermott Miller Consumer Index for the 3 months ended September, it was stronger than we'd seen in the quarter before, but the sentiment is still down there around what we saw in the global financial crisis. What's interesting about these numbers, though, is that for younger consumers, confidence is higher, and that could be because they don't have mortgages. They don't own houses, so they're not facing higher interest rates on their mortgage repayments. And they're more likely to change jobs more frequently, which means that in this labor market, they're getting pay rises that, more stable, older people perhaps who aren't willing to make as many switches in their career aren't benefiting from. So there is a difference between older consumers and younger ones. Certainly the younger ones are feeling a lot more buoyant.
You mentioned the labour market. How about the money market?
Well, let's see. Now, the U.S. Federal Reserve didn't surprise the market. It did raise the interest rate. That's the U.S. Federal Reserve. 75 basis points. So that's 0.75 percentage point. And what does that mean? Well, in itself, not a lot, but the fact that they are suggesting that they may continue to be hard on interest rate hikes, moving up to something like 4.6%. That saw the U.S. dollar rise to a 24-year high. And if you think that's quite a big number, think about this. The pound, it dropped to a 37-year low against the U.S. dollar. And of course, all currencies are affected by this. We're at 58.8 U.S. cents, 88.2 Australian, and 51.8 British pence. So we're holding our own against the pound. But, overall, we're going to be seeing our Reserve Bank making a new statement on monetary policy first week of October. Chances are they're going to have to be tough too, because whatever the U.S. Federal Reserve is doing, and they've been late to the party, let's be honest. The Reserve Bank of New Zealand was first up, and now it's going to have to be following. So that is going to put pressure on our dollar for sure, perhaps upward pressure. Who can say? Depends on what the U.S. Federal Reserve. All of this is about the U.S. Federal Reserve. Okay, so the top 50 index, well, we rose 19 points today, which is great because the rest of the market wasn't looking so good, to 11,518.
There you go.
That's the best I can say.
Hey, we had a story about VR headsets earlier and trialling jobs using a VR headset. What would you go for? Trialling a job? Any job? Forklift driver? Fruit picker?
How about something really exciting like parachute diving instructor?
Okay, parachute diving instructor Nona Peltier, perhaps going to leave the business desk and might be teaching you to go parachute diving next time you're in, I don't know, Queenstown or something, Nona, I guess.
I don't know.
Yeah, okay. Anyway. Right. The escalation in Russia's war effort has cast a dark cloud over world leaders who were gathered in New York to try find solutions to the world's crises. Jacinda Ardern is one of those at the United Nations General Assembly and today met with her Ukrainian counterpart and reaffirmed New Zealand's full support. Our deputy political editor, Craig McCulloch, is in New York.
He may not be at this year's General Assembly, but Vladimir Putin's presence is still very much being felt. The Russian president's announcement sent a Cold War chill through UNHQ, the statement prompting widespread condemnation from leaders, including Jacinda Ardern.
Let me be absolutely clear. New Zealand has always stood firmly against this illegal invasion, but we stand firmly against the escalation of this invasion.
The war in Ukraine has entered a tense new stage, Russia expanding its war efforts against a not-so-veiled threat of nuclear warfare.
A nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought.
The Kremlin command came just hours before the American president, Joe Biden, was due to take the podium in New York. President on president, a rhetorical rumble on the world stage.
This world should see these outrageous acts for what they are. Putin claims he had to act because Russia was threatened. But no one threatened Russia. And no one other than Russia sought conflict.
You don't attack and you don't threaten the use of nuclear weapons over a country you claim to be liberating. It's an absolute falsehood.
The escalation heaped attention on another highly anticipated speech too, delivered from the centre of the conflict. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was the only leader allowed to give his address in a pre-recorded video, and he did not hold back.
Russia wants war, it's true, but Russia will not be able to stop the course of history. Mankind and the international law are stronger than one terrorist state.
The speech won a standing ovation from leaders, including Ms Ardern. She described it as powerful and was seen sharing that message with Mr Zelensky's wife, who was watching on, before leaving the hall. Ironically, Ms Ardern almost missed the speech as she was meeting with Ukraine's Prime Minister, Denis Shmyhal. It was their second encounter in 24 hours. The two also seated together at a food security summit yesterday.
You know, here we are, going about our international diplomacy. They're in a war, and that war rages every day. And as I was sitting next to the Prime Minister yesterday as the Food Security Summit was underway, I wondered what was going through his mind, because whilst I'm thinking about domestic issues, he's thinking about warfare.
It's been a busy day for Ms Ardern, speaking also at a pandemic event and stepping in for Prince William to give a speech on environmental innovation.
I am an exceptionally poor substitute. But I also know we all understand the need for His Royal Highness to be with his family at this time.
The star-studded event saw her brush shoulders with Hollywood A-lister Matt Damon and billionaire Michael Bloomberg. But even they can't steal the spotlight from a war threatening to go nuclear.
Craig McCulloch reporting there from New York, and our reporter Sam Ollie has been speaking to Russians here about what they think of all of this too. We'll have her story a bit later. And we'll take you live to Moscow for the very latest after the 6 p.m. news. But right now it is 42 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora e te iwi, ho mai o whakaro. Don't forget you can text us about any of our stories tonight on 2101, and you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Here's Karen with the headlines.
An international relations expert doubts Vladimir Putin is suicidal, despite threats of nuclear escalation by the Russian president over the war in Ukraine. University of Otago professor Robert Patman told Checkpoint Mr. Putin is in a very difficult spot with few good options left. He says the Russian army has lost anything up to 50,000 troops, but the Kremlin has put off mobilisation for a long time. Meanwhile, New Zealand Foreign Minister Nanaia Mahuta says expelling Russia's ambassador remains an option and a decision could come soon. In New York, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has condemned Mr. Putin's comments as an extraordinary escalation. A father forced out of the Gloriavale Christian community has told the employment court how his daughter received third-degree burns at work in the kitchen. John Reddy says while working with boiling water in the kitchen, his daughter had an epileptic fit and received serious burns, with one going unnoticed for 6 hours. Water restrictions will start in Wellington from this Sunday, with leaky pipes partly to blame. The Level 1 restrictions means sprinklers and irrigation systems can only be used on alternating days and only at certain times. And in sport, the All Blacks have a new captain and loose forward trio and a rejigged midfield as injuries hit ahead of the second Bledisloe test. In traffic news, a breakdown has been blocking Lane 2 northbound on Auckland's Harbour Bridge. Drivers should pass with care and expect tailbacks. And in the South Island, motorists are warned to expect delays after a serious crash on State Highway 73, Lake Pearson, Arthur's Pass, which happened around 4:30. And State Highway 3 in Martinborough between Number 1 Line and Wards Line is scheduled to be reopened around 7 tonight after emergency hillside stabilisation and the clearing of a slip. It's 16 to 6.
Thanks, Karen. Let's go to some of your feedback now. First of all, on our lead story, which is, of course, the crisis in Russia. One listener says the Russian ambassador should have been sent home as soon as Russia invaded Ukraine. Our government's reasons for not doing so make no sense and are simply appeasing Russia. Thanks for that feedback. Another piece here. This is a play by NATO for Russian resources. They have lusted for dissolving Russia since 1992, when NATO should have been dissolved, this person says. And a 70-year-old former military person from Bay of Plenty. I thought Robert Patman of Otago University made a lot of sense on Russia. Yeah, I mean, Robert's often on the mark and we appreciate his time. Thanks for all of your feedback. Keep it coming. A father forced out of the Gloriavale Christian community has told a court how his epileptic daughter received third-degree burns while having a fit at work in the kitchen. John Reddy told the employment court hearing into whether 6 former Gloriavale women are employees that one of her injuries went untreated for hours. Neva Chittick reports from Christchurch.
While working with boiling water in the kitchen, John Reddy says his epileptic daughter had a fit and received serious burns, one of which went unnoticed for 6 hours.
Her hand was attended to, but she had a third-degree burn on her shoulder and no one was aware of it, not even my daughter was aware of it, until that evening.
Mr Reddy said he had also previously had a request for safety equipment on the Gloriavale farm he managed denied. He began to question the safety of the community for his 8 daughters and 2 sons.
Sadly, the main focus of the young women in the community is to work and produce babies. Their plight is a serious concern. I have grave concerns for our children, particularly the girls, should they have stayed in Gloriavale.
John Reddy says he felt he had no control over his children's lives once they were born into the community. Both he and his eldest daughter began to question the Gloriavale leadership. His daughter was asked to leave at 17 after close to 2 years of discipline.
It was bad. Her hair was starting to fall out. She was losing her hair from all the stress. And so I basically got the impression that they were sick and tired of dealing with her. She's just a hassle.
Mr Reddy was meant to drop his daughter at Greymouth train station. Instead, he dropped her at his aunt's house in Timaru. Shortly afterwards, he found himself being put into isolation for days at a time and was repeatedly asked by the leaders if he was ready to submit to them.
I was forced by the shepherds out of the community just prior to Christmas 2017. At this point, I was trying to convey that I hadn't left. I was still wearing my Gloriavale uniform to show that I had not left, but I had been forced out.
Gloriavale's leaders strongly deny the claims and say the women were volunteers, not employees.
It is 12 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. A major retail chain has taken the extraordinary step of emailing all their online customers with a warning about scammers imitating their website. The scammers are running fake ads for the Witchery fashion chain on social media to entice unsuspecting shoppers. So how widespread is it, and how can we protect ourselves? I spoke to Retail NZ's Greg Harford.
We certainly know that there are scams out there where bad guys are setting up fake websites, essentially, taking payments for goods online and then essentially pocketing the money and leaving consumers without the goods that they've paid for. So it is really important that customers are looking at the URL, the website address that they're using, and making sure that they are actually on a legitimate site owned by the brand that they're looking to shop with.
And in this case, right, it's social media platforms. So you might be scrolling Facebook or you might be scrolling Instagram, a Witchery label pops up and it advertises a clearance sale, for example. So how widespread is this kind of thing?
Well, certainly internationally, the scams that we're hearing about are quite widespread. There's a lot of stuff popping up on social media and in other places that's effectively leading customers to click on a link that takes them to somewhere that's not legitimate. There is a little bit of that happening in New Zealand at the moment. It's coming really from offshore, but it's hitting New Zealand customers. But it is something we can expect to see more of probably over the coming months.
So what's the advice for, well, people like me, the consumer?
Well, for consumers, the best advice is to make sure that you're dealing with a brand that you think you're dealing with. You can check the URL, the domain name, to make sure that it is the place you're expecting to be. And if you've got any doubts about it, if there's a deal that's too good to be true, it possibly is. So always a good idea to check that and make sure you're shopping in the right place before you put your credit card details in.
You mentioned the scam being particularly prevalent overseas and some cases in New Zealand as well. Can you give us some examples of the sorts of things specifically you're hearing about in New Zealand?
Well, we've certainly heard about fake social media accounts being set up to try and get customers to go to a shopping site that's not legitimate. We're aware of scams that are coming through email and text telling customers that they've won a prize and that they need to provide their details in order to take that prize up. There's a whole range of things going on out there, and scamming is increasingly sophisticated overseas, and sometimes it can be hard for consumers to know the difference.
So what can the people you represent do? What can retailers do about this, Greg?
Well, retailers are certainly, I think, working pretty hard to, spread the advice that customers need to make sure they're shopping on the right website, and to know that scams are often, if there's a really fantastic deal or you've won a prize that you're not expecting, it's probably too good to be true, and just be really, really careful before you hand over your credit card details or any other personal information.
Any other negative effects to retailers? I'm thinking blowback. People think they've bought off a legitimate site, so the retailer itself is then flooded with things like complaints, maybe loss of business.
Yeah, it can certainly be pretty create some pretty unhappy customers when they are scammed, and that can have a negative impact on the retail businesses who are quite legitimately not taking not the ones who are taking the money off the customer. It is just really important to remember that in these situations we're just asking everyone just to be nice and not get angry with retail workers from a legitimate business who actually aren't the ones who've been doing the scamming.
And a lot of these scams are obviously presenting themselves on, as we mentioned, things like Facebook, Instagram. So that's social media, right? And, one of the many issues that comes with social media these days. Would you expect any particular action from the social media company?
Well, I think when a social media company is informed about something questionable that's going on, they should be acting pretty quickly to take that information offline and to make sure that customers are protected as best as they can.
Have you come across anything personally, Greg? I'm sure you use Facebook, maybe Instagram. Have you ever scrolled down and thought that looks a little bit fishy? And if so, what have you done?
Look, I certainly have, and the best advice if you see something that looks a bit fishy is just to ignore it and keep on scrolling.
PSA, the clocks go forward on Sunday, indicating summer's on its way, and it's the same day Wellington will flick on its water restrictions. The level 1 restrictions will mean sprinklers and irrigation systems can only be used on alternating days and only at certain times. But it's not because of baking temperatures or low rainfall in the capital. Crystal Gibbons reports.
Moving to restrictions as daylight savings kicks in is a decision Wellington Water has made consistently over the past few years. But since May this year, Chief Advisor Lawrence Edwards says the water demand has been trending above what has been seen in previous years.
The main reason for that is that increased demand is largely leaks. We do have population growth, which is playing a factor there, but the majority of that is an ageing network and increasing leaks.
He says the leaks are both on the public side of the network and private property. For resident Nima, when it comes to leaky pipes draining precious water resource, the solution is simple.
Why don't they solve the problem then?
Fellow resident Pooja agrees.
There's a lot of water wasted in that way of leaky pipes, and so probably council should even look at repairing them and fixing them.
Lawrence Edwards says they realise it can be frustrating for the public, but they are working on it.
We are implementing a more intensive, urgent program of work to identify and fix leaks on both the public network and within private properties, and in particular to reduce the runtime of the most significant leaks.
But the work to be done isn't just up to Wellington Water, but each council as well, so there is a limit to what they can do. Some other residents we spoke to were in support of the measures being undertaken and believed the restrictions were the right step to take.
Cheers roared through both Parliament and Pipitia Marae in Wellington today as the Crown and Ngāti Maniapoto reached settlement. The King Country iwi is one of the largest remaining treaty settlements, a $177 million settlement, and a range of cultural redress was passed by Parliament today. Ashley McCall has more.
A convoy of Maniapoto packed our Pipitia Marae, travelling down to Ika-a-Maui by both train and bus. They came to see the third and final reading of their settlement, one that's been a long time coming.
I'm 21, so their fight has started before I was even born. So it's cool to see, in my lifetime, how long it's taken and that we are finally here.
I'm one of 5 sisters here today. Why we should be here? Because it's about our nannies. They would be crying because they'd be emotional, and they'd be proud because the mokopuna is following in their journey.
Finally it's gonna come to, in my time. I didn't think it would, but thank goodness.
At dawn, they came to Pipitia Marae, a ceremony that started with the taiaha Mangarongo being presented to the Crown. It was initially gifted in 1885, but the government rejected it, and it spent 140 years in the South Island, most recently at Otago Museum. It's been gifted back to the Crown for 5 years, and Treaty Negotiations Minister Andrew Little is adamant it will take its kaitiaki role seriously this time.
There's a cabinet already prepared, ready for it to sit in and to be cared for in. And I think that this is the responsibility of all Parliament, the Crown and Parliament, to make sure that we look after the taonga as an expression of the care that we want to take with the new relationship. And so I'm confident that we will do that.
Today's settlement includes relationship agreements, the return of 36 sites and right of first refusal in the King Country. But significantly, there's an apology. The chair of the settlement entity, Te Nehi Nehi Nui, Bella Takiari Bram, says the negotiations of the past 30 years have been difficult.
It's always a journey, right? And it just means a lot more. We've got a stronger foundation to start with, and we have come together. We are more united because we have taken that time. Not everyone's in the whare with us yet, but we will continue to have that kōrero, and we know what it takes.
Monkeypox country was a sanctuary for refugees in the Waikato Wars. It then maintained self-government for many years afterwards. Its boundaries were lifted in the 1880s after an agreement with the Crown to recognise mana whakahaere, but that was largely ignored. By the 20th century, Crown schemes and aggressive buying had rendered Monkeypox largely landless. Today, the Crown returned the land on which the railway lies. Ms Takiari Bram says it's been gifted straight back to the country.
That ownership, obviously, we have a first right of refusal for over 170 years on the railway from now on. So it provides us options, noting that we gave up a lot to allow the railway through.
Cheers erupted at both Parliament and Pipitia Marae when the final reading passed, followed by Waiata and Haka. Kaumatua Tom Roa says the settlement gives the iwi a sense of freedom.
We now have the opportunity to realise our own aspirations through our own means. And I think that's probably the most important thing, is that we have our own future in our own hands.
A formal apology to Monkeypox in Te Rohi Pōtai will be given in December.
Time for some of your feedback before we head to the 6 o'clock news on scammers. I've pointed out NZ scammers on Facebook. This person writes they've done it twice, and they say Facebook didn't care. They got no response. Secondly, from Jan, every time I turn my cell phone screen on, several ads show I have won a prize or money. Yes, something not right there, Jan. Maybe get that phone checked. On Russia as well. Conscripts won't go well in the trenches in the Russian winter. Yeah, a good point. And in keeping with the news over in Russia, we will have more on that. We'll cross live to Moscow after the news. We'll also have some Russian nationals living in New Zealand.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Karen McCarthy. New Zealand is inching closer to expelling New Zealand's Russian ambassador as Vladimir Putin escalates conflict with Ukraine. Foreign Minister Nanaia Mahuta says there's active consideration of next steps as tensions continue to rise. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The Russian president's comments about nuclear war and the plan to hold referendums on joining Russia in occupied regions of Ukraine have sparked global alarm. Throughout the conflict, New Zealand has said the preference has been to retain diplomatic contact, but the option of expulsion was always on the table. Ms Mahuta says those considerations have now stepped up, with the escalation of tensions unhelpful on a number of fronts. She says a decision to expel Ambassador Georgi Zuev could happen relatively quickly. The outcome of the flagged referendums in Ukraine could be a trigger, but any decision would have to be made by Cabinet.
An international relations expert believes Russia's decision to call up 300,000 reservists to fight in Ukraine shows Vladimir Putin is running out of options. Thousands of people are fleeing Russia after the partial mobilisation order. Professor Robert Patman has told Checkpoint that Mr Putin has delayed the plan for some time, but now has to take steps to replace his depleted forces.
It's estimated that Russia has lost up to about 50,000. This announcement, in a sense, has been put off by the regime for quite a long time because it is an admission that the special operation, as Mr Putin has called it, is not going according to plan.
Professor Patman predicts that based on the latest developments, Russia will be defeated before the end of the year. A mid-Canterbury farming leader says the news thousands of cattle infected with Mycoplasma bovis are to be culled will be a bitter pill for some farmers to swallow. The Ministry for Primary Industries says infected stock from the 5-Star Beef feedlot in Ashburton, which farms about 12,000 cattle, and stock from another 8 high-risk farms will also be culled to eradicate the disease. Mid-Canterbury Federated Farmers Nick Truebridge says it'll be the second time some farmers' cattle have been culled. Mr Truebridge says the measure is necessary to protect the country's international reputation. An ex-Gloriavale member has described the Christian community's approach to unwanted affection as backwards. Former member John Reddy has told the employment court in Christchurch the leaders told the girls to tell them if they did not like the hugs given to them by older males, and they'd apologise and stop.
And I thought, well, that's extremely backwards. Wouldn't you normally ask, would you like a hug? Would you, are you okay there? And they get to decline before the affection's given.
John Reddy says girls in the community are conditioned to have a good standing in the community with the leaders, so many will not speak up for fear of tarnishing their reputation. North Islanders on the east coast were alarmed to see a plume of steam rising from Whakaari White Island on Sunday. Steve Sherburne, duty volcanologist for GNS Science, says the plume was a passive emission of ash and no cause for alarm. But with broken monitoring equipment, he can't be completely sure there wasn't an eruption. Mr Sherburne says the activity observed on Sunday wouldn't typically be classified as an eruption. GNS Science has been unable to access the island since the 2019 eruption, which killed 22 people. New flood modelling shows the roads around a proposed $46 million riverside library for Nelson will need to be raised so people can access it in 100 years. City Council Infrastructure Group Manager Alec Luverdis says the flood mitigation plan for the new library has been rerun with new data from Searise NZ.
This new data shows that we would potentially be looking at a sea level rise in the order of 300 millimetres higher than what was identified in 2021. And that takes us to about 800 millimetres in terms of the Trafalgar-Halifax intersection.
Alec Luverdis says staff will do further work to understand the impact of raising road levels across a wider area of the inner city, then report back to Council. Technology is giving job hunters an interactive insight into jobs they might be keen to give a go. The Ministry of Social Development is giving those on the job seeker benefit a taste of work through virtual reality. MSD's Nicola Anderson says trying to find a job can be daunting, but the virtual reality headsets are a way to break the ice.
They get to experience things at their own pace, think about the things they're seeing. If they make mistakes, then nobody's around to see them do that. So it's a really cool way to get people sort of thinking about what they might want to do or what they don't want to do as well, because that's a big part of a job hunt as well is, actually, that's definitely not for me. And then that way they can put themselves, on the right path.
The Ministry will be holding virtual reality employment expos across the country. In sport, Waka Kotahi says it was not satisfied organisers of an historic Canterbury Road Relay had addressed significant safety concerns. The New Zealand Road Relay Championships was scheduled as part of the 82nd annual Takahei to Akaroa next Saturday. The iconic 76-kilometre route includes the main route between Akaroa and Christchurch. But organisers say they had to find an alternative location after failing to convince Waka Kotahi about the traffic management plan. The Transport Agency says they failed to address safety concerns, including near misses raised after the last race. That's the news.
Threats of nuclear war.
We will, without question, use all the means at our disposal to protect Russia and our people. This is not a bluff.
A nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought.
Criticism from our Prime Minister.
To claim that they will use and could use any other additional weapons that are available to them flies in the face of the lie they have told that they are there to liberate others.
The latest from around the world. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Nick Truebridge is back with Checkpoint after the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. For Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, showers widespread during the afternoons and evenings with possible thunderstorms. Waikato, Waitomo, Bay of Plenty, the Central High Country, also Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Rain spreading south today, heavy falls in the east, easing to showers later tomorrow with thunderstorms possible in Taihape. Taranaki and Whanganui to Wellington and Wairarapa. Isolated showers, rain develops overnight, possibly heavy about the Tararua district, and thunderstorms are possible from South Taranaki to Manawatu later tomorrow. Bulla, fine today, the odd shower possible this afternoon, cloudy tomorrow and a few showers possible inland. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, north of Christchurch, mainly fine today. Cloudy tomorrow with rain spreading south, scattered falls for Nelson. The remainder of Canterbury, also Otago, Southland and Fiordland, fine apart from cloudy areas morning and night. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy. It's 6:07.
Thanks, Karen. No mai hoki mai. Russian security forces have reportedly arrested more than 1,300 people as a spate of anti-war protests broke out in dozens of cities across Russia. Vladimir Putin's mobilisation of 300,000 military reservists and the threat of nuclear weapons has also led to skyrocketing prices for one-way flights out of Russia and as locals seek to flee. In a televised address, Mr. Putin accused the West of occupying Ukraine and engaging in nuclear blackmail. The escalating war of words comes as Ukrainian troops have recaptured some areas that were occupied early in the war. In a moment, we'll go live to Moscow. But first, this report from the BBC's Steve Rosenberg.
Under pressure in Ukraine, Russia's president has chosen the path that is most familiar to him: escalation.
To defend our motherland, its sovereignty and territorial integrity, for the security of our people and on the liberated territories, it is necessary to support the proposal of the Defence Ministry and Chief of General Staff to announce a partial mobilisation of military reservists.
7 months after invading Ukraine, the Kremlin is calling up 300,000 reservists to support what it still calls the special military operation. And from Russia's commander-in-chief, this threat to the West.
Our country, too, has different weapons of destruction. In some cases, they are more modern than those of NATO. If the territorial integrity of our country is threatened, then to defend Russia and our people, we shall, of course, use all means at our disposal. I am not bluffing.
So why the threat, and why now? Well, in a few days' time, the Kremlin will try to annex a whole swathe of Ukrainian territory. Vladimir Putin's saber-rattling sends a message to Ukraine and to the West: don't attack, don't try to take those areas back. As news of mobilisation spread, there were reports that flights out of Russia were selling out fast, amid concern that men of fighting age would soon not be allowed to leave the country. I'm worried this is just the start, Sergei tells me, and that there could be full mobilisation. But Margarita says that if our leaders demand this, we must do our duty. I trust Putin 100%. Later, the president met his defence minister. They've decided on mobilisation because they're short of troops. So short that in prison camps across Russia, this mercenary chief, a close Putin ally, has been recruiting inmates to fight in Ukraine, promising them their freedom if they serve 6 months with his group, Wagner, and survive. When Vilena went to visit her husband in prison a few days ago, she was told the husband, a convicted murderer, wasn't there.
I said, what do you mean, not here? He's been here for 13 years and suddenly he's gone? They told me they had no more information. A few days later, he called me from a Ukrainian number. I know for sure that my husband is in Ukraine. Even if he agreed to go there, he was sent illegally. Sending convicts into combat is against the law.
Now the Kremlin will be sending reservists to Ukraine. But in Moscow tonight, a protest against mobilisation. Hundreds have been detained across the country. Not everyone in Russia is willing to stay silent about Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine and his war with the West.
And our correspondent Stuart Smith is in Moscow and joins us now. Stuart, good evening. We're hearing reports, of course, of Russian people fleeing in response to Putin's call to arms. What more can you tell us, please?
Yeah, they're certainly true. Both flights and the land borders of Russia are being inundated with people that are trying to leave, either by vehicles at land borders like Georgia, Russia and the Georgian border, where Russian citizens don't require a visa to try to cross. Similarly, flights for Wednesday were, and Thursday now, are fully booked to countries that don't require visas for Russian citizens. Those that remain for the rest of the week are about 10 times more expensive and incredibly limited. There is a substantial number of people that are trying to leave Russia at the moment to clearly avoid potential conscription. And there's mixed messaging in Russia about whether they will succeed. Officially, there is no information that people, even those who are in the first tier of potential conscription, are prevented from leaving Russia. There's been no announcement by the president or anyone else that that is something that is not allowed, but there are people saying that they are being turned back at the border when they present their passports, which for every Russian man will have information outlining what their status is in the event of conscription. And so the border officials will know that they are potentially going to be called up as one of those 300,000 in the next few weeks.
And of course, reports of protests as well. Could you give us an idea, Stuart, of the sentiment of the Russian people generally? Obviously, the protesters are against this call to arms, but how would you say the balance is in terms of pro-Putin's effort and against?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting switch, an interesting flip which has happened. If you talked before conscription about what people were like in terms of support or not support, the vast majority of people would be in the camp of don't care, aren't following, not particularly invested, nor particularly against. They were just carrying on with their lives, which in general has been the strategy of the Russian government for the last few years in terms of keeping people politically disengaged. You now have a situation where it's impossible for many people to be disengaged, both those 300,000 that allegedly will be conscripted, as well as their families that will be very concerned they're going to die abroad in Ukraine. And so now I think people are forced to have an opinion. And for some people, for sure, that has come down on the side of the Russian government is asking us to fight for what is seen and reported by the government as an existential threat to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Russia. This is like the response to the Nazis in the Great Patriotic War, World War II, as it's known here. And so for many people, even if their sons are being sent to war, that is something that they believe is going to be justified by the need for it. Other people, of course, who may have also been disengaged before, are now thinking this has gone too far. This is something we were promised would not happen by the Kremlin, that mandatory conscription was never on the cards for the so-called special military operation, and therefore this is going too far. In terms of protest numbers, around 1,300 is the latest from the NGOs that monitor this, which is not particularly substantial. That's across Russia. But this comes after years of the opposition movement being completely neutered in Russia and harsh penalties for those that protest, including reports from 4 police stations across Russia that those men who have been taken off the streets by police are then being immediately sent to receive a summons to be conscripted to Ukraine. They're being selected as those that should go in the first cohort.
In terms of Putin delivering his message last night, I assume this is, well, basically broadcast over radio, on television, as people are going about their business, right? So what was the reaction when it came over the airwaves or over the television? I don't know where you were. Was it immediate uproar?
There was some hints it was coming. So I was in Moscow at the time. This was on Tuesday night. There was an announcement that the president would be giving a major speech in the evening. That was then delayed with reports that the speech had been pre-recorded but would be aired on Wednesday morning in Russia. So people knew something big was coming. We had just heard on Tuesday, there was some legislation passed which increased the punishments for people who refused to follow orders during mobilization. Then we had the announcements of these referendums taking place in 4 Ukrainian regions, and then a big speech by the president. It became pretty clear that mobilization or something like it was going to be announced, and then indeed partial mobilization was. In terms of the response, not everyone in Russia has been paying attention to this. If you look at graphs of news coverage and people watching, they've plummeted as all the main state television channels exclusively almost show reports and report on the special military operation, which has turned a lot of people off. For many, I expect in Russia, mobilization came as a big surprise. First of all, because Russia has only been presenting successes in Ukraine, which would not lead people to think that mandatory conscription was required. Secondly, it was always promised that it would never happen. And so I think surprise would be the first one. Then perhaps anger for many people that thought they would never have to get involved and whose families would never need to deal with this problem of their sons and fathers and brothers being sent to fight. And then for some, certainly support. Others saying that this is something that should have happened a long time ago, that Russia is fighting for repressed people in Ukraine, that there is an existential threat to the country. And in fact, more should have happened much sooner.
Thanks, Stuart. Stuart Smith there joining us from Moscow. Well, completely horrendous, a total nightmare and crushing. That's how Russians back here in New Zealand have reacted to President Putin's address to the nation. Some of them spoke to our reporter Sam Ollie.
I felt sick to my stomach and just got a pounding headache immediately when I read this news yesterday that it actually happened.
Elena Nikiforova says Putin's speech panicked her Russian friends and family. She knows people preparing to go into hiding.
As soon as this news came out, people been calling me and messaging me constantly all night yesterday night and this morning. So I just had 4 hours sleep this night.
As people try to escape, fearing conscription, flights are selling out and there are queues at borders. She spoke to a friend this morning who fears for her son's future.
He's healthy and so he will be qualified for the army service. And she was in complete hysterics and panic and not knowing what to do and how to save her son, basically.
Ekaterina, also from Moscow, says Putin's leadership makes her feel hopeless.
It's just out of control and I feel despair, like nothing can really be done.
Her father is a former pilot and worries he will be called up to fight.
He's definitely considering possibilities to move away from Russia.
But Ekaterina is acutely aware her family has it easier than others across the border.
Those challenges are nothing comparing to what Ukrainian people are going through.
Yaroslav Sergeev is from Siberia and he's angry, particularly about Putin's nuclear remarks.
Nobody knows what to expect from the Putin and political elites. All of them, as I mentioned before, in my opinion, are criminals.
Andrei is both Russian and Ukrainian. Many of his male university friends from Russia have already fled during the war, starting new lives elsewhere to avoid being forced to fight.
Basically just left everything that they had in Russia and just ran away, like some to Armenia, some to Turkey.
Natalia is from eastern Russia and some of her family are in the army. They have not been deployed to the front line, but expect to be soon. But her biggest concern is nuclear war.
I'm terrified of it. I actually believe that he can press the button. When the war started, for the first 5 days, I had nightmares. I would wake up in the middle of the night and quickly check telephone to see if he blew up a bomb.
Despite the distance, she has been deeply affected by the conflict emotionally.
When the war started, I couldn't even work. I had to resign from my job because it was just unbearable. Like that moral guilt and shame and everything, it was just so pressuring.
There are more than 7,500 Russian people living in Aotearoa, according to the last census. This evening, groups of Russian opponents to the Ukrainian war have planned protests outside the Russian embassy in Wellington and in Aotea Square.
It's 21 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. In Iran, at least 9 people have died as protests continue for a 5th day over the death of a young woman in police custody. 22-year-old Mahsa Amini was detained after she exited a metro station for breaching the rules about wearing a hijab. There have been clashes with police in at least 15 cities, with protesters, many of them women setting fire to their hijabs. The BBC's Rana Rahimpour reports.
Her name is Mahsa Amini, and she was just 22. She was arrested by the morality police in Tehran earlier this month. They said she wasn't wearing the mandatory hijab or headscarf properly. The security forces have released this CCTV footage of Mahsa in detention. It's heavily edited. Suddenly, Mahsa collapses. The authorities say she had a heart condition, but eyewitnesses say she was beaten up in the police van. She's taken to hospital and ends up in a coma. A few days later, she's dead. Women cry, "Death to the dictator," and wave their headscarves at her funeral. The inscription on her gravestone reads that she's not dead. Her name will become a symbol and live forever.
In Australia, the fallout from bombshell allegations about mistreatment of Indigenous players at an AFL club has been swift. Shocking claims allege young First Nations players at the Hawthorn club were separated from their partners and, in one case, told to terminate a pregnancy. The 3 former Hawthorn officials named in these reports have all stood down from their current roles, with the former coach voicing a spirited defence, rejecting the allegations and denying any wrongdoing. Subsequent investigations are now underway, with calls for a complete review of the supports for Indigenous players across the entire league. The ABC's Isabel Musali reports.
Over the past 24 hours, allegations in an unreleased external review into Hawthorn Football Club's treatment of Indigenous players have shocked Australia. Families of 3 former players involved in the review, who spoke to the ABC, allege they were pressured by the club to separate from their partners and their families. And for the Indigenous man who wrote the review, it's taken a personal toll. Phil Egan is a former Richmond player and director of consultancy Binmada.
Listening to the accounts was absolutely horrific. You could not make it up. And the impact that it's had on me has been not dysfunction, but occasional despair in trying to type up and read what I've heard.
The AFL has now launched its own investigation into the allegations raised in the Hawthorn review. Phil Egan says once that is complete, there should be an investigation of the treatment of Indigenous players across the entire competition.
I know that Helen Milroy's, since she started on the commission, she's been calling out for a summit, an anti-racism summit, mandated by all clubs to attend. And that's been deadpanned, to somewhat. But I think now the AFL can look at the bigger picture, or we can attempt to anyway, to arm the clubs with the structures to deal with not just First Nations players, but all players of diversity.
Phil Egan says as a Richmond player in the 80s, he was provided with as much family support as he wanted, just like other players. He says clubs should ensure that's happening now across the board.
They've got to think, all right, they were drafted because they could play. They were drafted because they've got great personalities from where they came from, their families. So why try and change that? It's as if football is this important sanctity that's different to the real world. It's not. It is a game.
Media presenter and Indigenous woman Shelley Ware has covered the AFL extensively. She agrees Indigenous players often struggle with being separated from their communities.
Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have a really strong sense of connection to country, to community, and to culture. And that's what makes us well. So it's really important for us to make those connections. And some clubs do a really good job of that. But there's more that needs to happen. And it goes back to saying, listen to what your players need and keep them well in their cultural spirituality as well.
Despite past failings in the AFL, Shelley Ware believes Australia has reached a turning point. Former Hawthorn staff members named in the review have welcomed the AFL investigation, but say they were not interviewed and deny any wrongdoing.
The film The Queen's Gambit helped millions of us understand the competitive world of chess, and now there's a real-world drama erupting in the game involving the current world champion and allegations of cheating aimed at an American challenger. Twice in the past 2 weeks, the world champion, that's Magnus Carlsen, has walked out of games against a teenage chess prodigy. David Silito reports.
The game everyone has been waiting for.
For the commentators at chess24.com, this online match began pretty normally. 19-year-old Hans Niemann, an American chess prodigy, played pawn to d4.
This is his main move.
Magnus Carlsen, the dashing Norwegian world champion, knight to f6.
d4, knight f6.
Niemann,
c4, yeah.
pawn to c4.
Definitely.
I hope you're following this. Then from Carlsen.
And what?
Nothing. His screen went blank.
What?
No.
This Julius Baer Generation Cup match was over.
What happened? That's it?
Magnus Carlsen just resigned, got up and left.
Wow.
In the chess world, this is a sensation.
Speechless, yeah?
However, there is history between this pairing. Earlier this month, Carlsen was beaten by Niemann at a match in St. Louis in the United States. Magnus Carlsen then withdrew from the competition. His only comment, a cryptic tweet featuring a quote from the football manager Jose Mourinho saying, "If I speak, I am in big trouble." The issue hovering over this, suspicions that Niemann is a cheat. He has admitted there were incidents that he now hugely regrets when he was 12 and 16, but he says now he's clean.
I have never cheated in an over-the-board game. When I was 12 years old, I have never, ever, and I would never do that. That is the worst thing I could ever do, cheat in a tournament with prize money.
It's thrown the chess world into a ferment. If he is cheating, how? One bizarre suggestion, vibrating electric beads hidden in a place where judges might be reluctant to look. However, no one's come up with any evidence. It appears to many that young Niemann may simply have outplayed the champion.
Now an update on a story we brought you last night about the scathing review of Ports of Auckland's failed automation program. Lawyers representing Ports of Auckland's former chair have written to Auckland Council Mayor Phil Goff and the port company over the release of the report. Ports of Auckland abandoned the project earlier this year following years of delays and a cost to ratepayers of at least $65 million. As we reported last night, a probe ordered by Mr Goff found management, governance and other key factors related to the project were poor. There were also personality clashes, and those led to an unsatisfactory culture. But the Mayor's office has this afternoon confirmed it's received legal correspondence from former Ports Chair Liz Cootes about the release of the report. Checkpoint has also approached Ports of Auckland. It's confirmed it also has received legal letters from Liz Cootes, but cannot provide further details at this stage. That is it from us tonight. The late news team will keep you up to date throughout the evening, and on First Up tomorrow we will have the latest from Moscow. Do not miss it. Have a good evening.
RNZ headlines at 6:30. The government is inching closer to expelling the Russian ambassador to New Zealand as Vladimir Putin rattles a nuclear sabre over Ukraine. A former Gloriavale member has told the employment court that women had to have babies at an acceptable rate to avoid criticism in the Christian community. And in Iran, protests have become increasingly violent over the death of a young woman who'd been detained by the country's morality police. At least 9 have been killed. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather at 7.